Beef and barley soup is one of those things that you probably don't think about a lot, but after you try this recipe, you're gonna realize why it needs to be in your kitchen. Super delicious, super hearty, great for the end of winter, during winter, whenever you want something delicious and cozy. Let's make some. Beef and barley soup, it has a couple steps, but it's one of those that is such a cozy, comforting soup, really hearty because it has beautiful pieces of beef in it. And what we're gonna use for it is a chuck roast. Chuck roasts are great because they really work well with long cooking times because they need to really break down and become tender during that long process. So that's why I'm using a chuck, and I've broken it down, and I am just doing about 1-inch size cubes. So I broke it down to smaller pieces and then just cut strips. And now it's a rough 1-inch cube. We're not gonna be perfect on this. Sometimes there's natural delineations and maybe the marbling, sometimes there aren't. Now, when I am going through, if I find big pieces of, like extra big pieces of fat, I take those out. Some fat is good, but if there's big chunks, those I obviously take out. And the reason we're breaking down in these pieces is, this is what's then gonna slowly cook and just become tender. And it's gonna flavor the soup so much. And it really is, it's one of those that it kind of sounds like an old school soup, you know, like, what, does my grandma have beef and barley soup? But I think when you try it, you realize like, wow, this soup, it really deserves a place at the table. We all deserve a place at the table. And so what I have here now are all my pieces. I'm just putting it on a small sheet pan. And the important part with any meat, is to salt it well. So what I'm gonna do is salt, and I always use kosher salt, you know that. And I'm gonna salt all the pieces, and I have some pepper here too, some fresh ground pepper, and I'm gonna do that also. But what I'm gonna do is even mix it up and just make sure, so I have a dirty hand and a clean hand, and I'm gonna make sure that I get all sides of this, as if I can, salted. That's your first layer of flavor. And salting meat is super important. That's what brings out the flavor of the meat. That's what actually helps seasons the meat. And this is our one chance to do that. So I have some oil that I've been heating, but I'm gonna wash my hand, and we're gonna take this over, and we're gonna put it right in the oil. So what I have is some high heat oil. I'll usually use an avocado oil. And what I wanna do is make sure it's hot. So when you put it in, do you hear that sear? That's what you want. And what I wanna do now is kind of just roughly brown the meat. This is the first time that we're gonna get a chance to start giving a nice crust to this meat, and then it's gonna have a long cooking time. So I wanna make sure we really brown and give a good crust to it. One, that's gonna create that crust and those bits in the pan, that fond on the bottom of the pan, and that's gonna be flavor. Then it's also gonna give flavor to these little pieces of meat. So I'm kind of gonna do it in 2 batches, lay them out kind of so they're not touching, because then they'll just steam. Instead, we want them to have a crust. So you can see I'm taking the last pieces of meat out, and this is the kind of crust I like on them, that nice, deep, beautiful brown crust. And usually it takes a higher heat than you think, but also when they release from the pan, that means usually they're ready. They're gonna stick it first until they create that nice brown crust, then they're ready. Now I'm just putting them, they're not fully cooked, so I'm just putting them on this, gonna reserve all their juices and everything. And what we have here is that deep, beautiful fond on the bottom. I am gonna add some onion to it. So I've been chopping up some onion. Now, most of the vegetables, we're not gonna add till the end. The celery and the carrot and that pearled barley that is right beside it, that's all gonna be added later on the cooking, because we don't wanna make all those vegetables soggy and mushy and gross. But the onion, I do wanna give it that base flavor. And so that's why I'm gonna add the onion right now and let it really just kind of work into that oil, create a beautiful, delicious underlying flavor, and that's what's important here. So this is a really hot pan. So I actually turned the heat off for just a little bit to let it cool down a bit from all that meat. But I'm gonna let this onion now saute in that mixture. So you can see the onions have really softened. They've really picked up a lot of that beautiful fond off the pan. We're gonna add a little bit of tomato paste. So you see this trick a lot. What this does is, the tomato paste is actually gonna caramelize a little bit in the bottom of this pan. It's gonna actually have the sugars that are in tomatoes start to caramelize, and it's gonna add this depth of richness. So to me, anytime we're cooking, anytime we're making something like a soup that takes extra steps, it's about the flavor. If you're gonna take the time to make something homemade, you want that flavor in it. You want that extra effort to be noticed and to be tasted, and that's what something like this does. When you cook out tomato paste like this, which you can see it's already darkening the color, and the bottom of the pan is starting to create a film on it, just takes a couple minutes, and then instantly you have this richer, almost sweeter taste that's underneath everything, that isn't forward, it just is really delicious. So what I'm gonna do now that the tomato paste is cooked, I'm gonna add a little bit of wine. Think of it like you would with like a beef bourguignon or a really good beef roast. It's again gonna add that depth of flavor. We're just gonna pour in some, and what it's also gonna do, you're gonna notice, do you see what I'm doing? I'm scraping up the bottom of the pan. Look at that, that's beautiful. That's what we want. All those bits are gonna go back into this. I'm gonna cook the wine pretty much out completely. I don't need a lot of that liquid in there. I wanna cook it down and condense the flavor, and we'll move on. So it doesn't take long, and that wine has just cooked down. Do you see how beautiful and rich that is in there? So it's really condensed its flavor. So this is now ready just to build the soup that we're gonna simmer for a while. So this is all that beef we browned off. Look at those crusty pieces, and then any of the juices. You want those in there too, because they're now gonna finish fully cooking in this soup, and it's gonna really create the most delicious flavor. We're gonna add some beef stock. You can use, you know, whatever kind you like. It's not like you have to use homemade. Use what you enjoy using. I do like to have a few tomatoes with their juice, just diced tomatoes. I think it adds a little nice texture. It adds something kind of to offset all the beef that we're gonna have in here. And then as this is coming to a simmer, I wanna come over and talk about how we can add a little bit more of a flavor. So during the simmering process, which takes a couple hours, towards the end of it, we're gonna put in the rest of our vegetables so they don't overcook. We're gonna put in that beautiful barley. So all of that just kind of simmers, and the barley actually soaks in a lot of that excess liquid. But what I wanna do is make sure we have some type of flavor compound here. And what I'm gonna do is, this is a big bunch of parsley, which I love parsley, but we often just times don't think about the stems. And let me tell you something, these stems, if you don't know it, just take one sometime. Instead of wasting them, this is what I do in my beef and noodles, the recipe on my website. If you just eat a little bit of that stem, there's so much flavor in there, and we throw it out. So I'm gonna bundle it with some rosemary and some thyme. I actually went out to my plant room. That's where I actually have a rosemary plant, and my bay leaves I'm gonna throw in are all from out there. I'm gonna tie these together with those stems, and what that is gonna do is just allow that flavor from those stems to seep into and just add so much flavor here. And that's one of my favorite things. I'm gonna do a butcher's knot there and do two, and then tie it tightly, and then just do it once more for a knot. This is gonna add a whole bunch of flavor, and then we're gonna be able to pull it out at the end, which is really nice. So that's tied together. We're gonna put in some bay leaves. Believe me, if you can, try to find a fresh bay leaf. Sometimes in the herb section at a grocery store you do. I go out to my plant room again. I have a plant that I save. Fresh has so much flavor, and it's so much better than you think. For garlic, what I'm gonna do is just take a couple cloves, and I'm just gonna smash them to get that skin off, and then we're gonna throw them in whole. You notice I didn't cook the garlic like we often will. I want that sweet garlic flavor just to come out and meld into the soup. These will literally become so soft, they just melt away. And it'll add a beautiful, just nice garlic flavor without being too strong. So we're gonna throw this in here. We're gonna throw this wonderful bundle in here. We're gonna just nestle it all in there. This is gonna come to a simmer or to a boil, and then I will turn it to a simmer, slightly cover it, and just let it cook for a couple hours until that meat is becoming to be tender, but then we're gonna add the vegetables and everything in before that. So the soup has been simmering away, and I want to show you because it looks beautiful. You can see it's just slowly simmering, nice and low and slow. And what it's doing is just tenderizing that meat and really building so much flavor in there. So what I want to do now is add pearled barley. So you can see pearled barley is beautiful, and look how it adds, once it actually cooks, which it takes a while to cook. We want to add it in the last hour to hour and a half, because it slowly soaks in all of that flavor and becomes tender, but still has a great texture to it. I love barley, actually. So then I also want to add in some carrots and some celery. Now these I did not want to get way too mushy, which if they've been in there the whole time, they would have. So I'm going to add them at this point, so they add kind of some nice heft to it without overcooking. I think that's the important part of knowing certain soups aren't just necessarily a dump and go. They need a little bit of time. So I'm just going to stir it. Just bring that all together. We still have our herbs in there. They're kind of just bundled together. So all that barley now is just gonna cook. This meat is gonna continue to tenderize, and soon enough, we'll be having soup. So once the soup has simmered a while longer and the barley becomes softened, it is just this beautiful, to me, this is the convergence of a really good roast beef, but in soup form. And so it's, to me, just has so much flavor and depth of flavor. So remember all those right here, those herbs we just tied together. This is why we did it, because then they can just come out and we can just discard them very easily, which I'll just set them over here for now. And then same with the bay leaves. If you can see them easily, pick them out. The other ones, pick out while you're, just portioning it out. I feel like that's what we always did growing up. We'd always find some in there. Now what you want to make sure when it's ready is you take a piece of that beef. Let me just set it over here for you so you can see it. And look how easily, like I just take my knife, look how that is just like so soft, so tender. That's what you want. You want those pieces of beef just to kind of fall apart like that. They're still holding at the moment, but we want them to fall apart. Remember that garlic we put in? Here's like a piece. See it right there? Guess what? If you just put it up against the side, it just smashes into nothing. So that's why we just like to throw it in whole. It does its duty. Look at all that barley. It's hearty. There's another leaf. Now, I do think the important part at the end is to add a ton, like a good handful of that parsley. I think that adds a fresh flavor at the end, kind of wakes everything up again, just like vinegar would sometimes at the end of a long stew. It adds a really nice, just like punch, because good parsley does add flavor. And then it's ready to go. So this is what I love about this soup. It has a nice heartiness to it. It has all those vegetables that we put in, you know, with the barley there at the end. It has that beautiful beef. I mean, look at this. If this doesn't look good, it's just like a great bowl of coziness, of warmth. It's steaming hot, of course, which means I get to burn my mouth again. I'm joking, I won't. I like things super hot anyway, so. That broth, that is drinkable. It is so much flavor in that broth. It's rich and yet somehow isn't too rich. It has lightness to it. And then you get those pieces of beef that just melt in your mouth. Look at those and how they just easily fall apart. I love that. And the barley to me is just cooked. I love how barley has this toothiness, a great texture, but it also is soft enough that it's really palatable and enjoyable to eat. So what do I hope you do? I hope you enjoy some really good, wholesome, hearty soup, and that's what beef and barley soup is. You know, there's a lot of different ways to make it, but the important part is to maximize the flavor, maximize that beefiness you can get out of it. And that's what we did by caramelizing the tomato paste, by really driving home with good beef stock, by building it with that wine that we cooked down. It all builds tremendous flavor that at the end, we're rewarded with a really delicious soup. So share it around, check my website, wyseguy.com, for this recipe and all my other recipes. They're all on there, so you can go find them on the website. Until next time, winter isn't over yet, so you better enjoy some soup.